Good morning, Al.
Good morning, Craig. We're going to test the technology this morning because I'm in Gothenburg, Sweden, on a cruise in the Baltic Sea. So we'll see. And at some point in the week when we do it again, either on the Spy or our morning brief, we're actually going to be at sea. And the crew here says this is going to work just fine, but we'll see.
That's good. Well, you're coming in.
Yeah,
You're coming in loud and clear. And
right.
just because you left, things have
Yeah,
not slowed down.
yeah,
Maybe I'll kick it off and just talk about
right,
Colorado for a minute, which
right.
I think is kind of a fascinating state. For one reason, they allow voters who are unaffiliated with either the Republican or Democratic Party to vote.
Yeah,
And I guess for the first time, over half of the eligible voters are now unaffiliated. I'm not sure about, and because I haven't been able to find any of the data yet, I'm not sure that made much of a difference in yesterday's primary elections, but it certainly could make a difference when you get to November. Anyway, yesterday another
yeah,
Democratic Socialist won, knocked off
right,
a 15-term, 30-year incumbent in the first
right,
district of Colorado, an elected official who actually won her seat a year before her opponent was born. Pretty
right.
amazing. 29-year-old. I don't
Yeah,
know exactly what to make of it. I want to hear your reaction. I did see a piece in Politico that, there's all these labels flying around,
right.
Democratic Socialists and everything else. But their point was that the establishment was getting beaten by the fighters, by those who really
Yeah.
come to the game to take on the establishment. And I kind of get the feeling that's a pretty good takeaway from yesterday in Colorado. What do you think?
I think that's right. Colorado's a really interesting state, at least on the Democratic side. I'm not so sure. I don't know as much about Republicans, but we've had some of the most innovative politicians over the last 30 or 40 years come out of Colorado. I mean, Richard Lamb, who was a really renegade governor, early member of the DLC, who really challenged I mean, again, challenging the political establishment with ideas that were really radical for his time. Roy Romer, as governor, he was the vice chair of the DLC, later, I think, chair of the Democratic National Party. And I always thought he was about as innovative as you can be. And then, of course, Gary Hart challenged the establishment. And Tim Wirth, who actually, I believe, represented the district you're talking about, which is the first district in Denver, before Diana DeGette, who got beat. And Tim was, you know, I still am in contact with Tim all the time. He was an original reformer when we started the New Democrat movement in the House Democratic Caucus, when you were in the White House with Ronald Reagan, uh, and then was elected senator. So it's got a long tradition. It's interesting because the first district that where I think her name was Milat Tiros won, Democratic Socialist,
Right.
is a very blue district. It's very much like the districts in New York where the Democratic Socialists won. I always thought Diana DeGette was a little bit too liberal for me, so it doesn't surprise me that's a district that that had that result. But Michael Bennet, who's been an excellent senator, got beat by the Attorney General for the governor's nomination, and I think one of the issues was Bennett's pretty mild-mannered guy, and this guy Phil Weiser was a really hard fighter. I don't think he's particularly left-wing. I mean, I think he's a pretty mainstream Democrat. And there was another district, the eighth district, where uh, a Demo- a Democratic Socialist won over a more moderate candidate. That's a Republican-held seat, but what I've been reading is that it may have turned enough so that so that having a candidate who's too far left won't really matter in the general election. But the interesting thing is not what happens in those particular districts, but whether it changes the attitude toward Democrats overall. And I just want to mention this because the New York Times has done a survey, New York Times CN a survey in 6 key Senate races: North Carolina, Maine, Texas, Alaska, Iowa, and Ohio. And they have the Republicans ahead a little bit still in Alaska, which Cook changed this morning to a toss up, Iowa and Ohio. And the Democrats ahead, Texas, they have even, and the Democrat ahead, Roy Cooper in North Carolina by 7, and Plattner in Maine still by 2. But the interesting thing is this question of whether the Democratic Party is too left, I think may have an important bearing because in every one of those states, except for Maine, the Democratic Senate candidate is running better than the generic House Democrat. In other words, so doing better than the party. In Maine, and I think this is a warning sign, even though Plattner still is ahead, he's running 9 points behind the generic Democrat. And in states where that are close, like Alaska, Iowa, and Ohio, where they have Republicans up by 2 or 3 points in those states, those candidates are viewed as too left according to the Times, between 25 and 36%. But the party as a whole is viewed as too left by 52 to 57%. So those, sort of built-in perceptions might really play a big role in the end.
Yeah, they could. One of the things that I'm impressed by, even though I might disagree with a lot of the things
Right.
that Mayor Mamdani might do,
Right.
is, as you know, we posted on our site
Right.
an interview with him because I think the messaging is very strong, and you and I talk a lot about the importance of the message and policy and all that, and
Yeah.
I don't know in the end whether you can really make some of these labels stick. I know Republicans in Colorado immediately came out and said, "This is
Yeah.
terrific. We're running against, New York socialists."
Yeah.
Well, okay, what does that mean? I will say, if the messaging is like Mamdani, who talks about, you
Yeah.
know, really supporting and helping
Yeah.
working Americans and those kinds of things, it really reduces the impact of these labels. And the messaging that's going to go on in race after race is probably going to, in my view, have more of a determination than some of the labels that get thrown around, but we'll see.
Yeah, I agree with that. I watched Mamdani on with our friend Jonathan Carl,
Yeah.
and I thought he was terrific. He's very skilled. He is a very skilled politician. When I did my media training, we actually used George H.W. Bush as the example of somebody who could stay on message. And Mamdani can stay on message. He was asked about all these crazy things one of those candidates had said, and all he talked about was we're for working class voters. But here's the interesting thing that these when you look at the vote these Democratic Socialists actually get, and also when you look at the breakdowns, for example, in Maine with Graham Plattner, who's viewed as pretty left, the those Democratic Socialists and very left candidates win among highly educated white voters. Among working class voters, they get clobbered.
Hmm.
And but so it's going to be really interesting. As I say, Mamdani only talks about working class voters, but for example, in Maine, Plattner, I think, is running about 20 points behind uh, Susan Collins in non-college voters and running about 30 points ahead among college graduates plus.
Interesting. Hey, let's jump
So,
to the Supreme Court, which I'm sure you
right,
noticed as you
right,
were traveling, was
right.
issuing opinions left and right. I
Yeah,
reasonably so. A lot of the focus here on the news coverage has been on birthright citizenship,
yeah,
and that's that decision is a big one. But the one that is getting a little less focus, and I'm not sure about the interpretation, is this question of dropping the limitations on what the national political parties can spend on behalf of candidates,
yeah,
claiming that there's going to be this enormous shift, huge shift. In fact, some of the commentary this morning was filled with people talking about how the Republican Party has $100 million in their account. But to me, I'm not so sure that this is that dramatic of an event. My problem is more with the way in which uh, political funds are raised and how millions and millions of dollars can come from one person. As you know, in the case of Larry Ellison, $45
Right.
million
Right.
going to Trump. So $100 million a surplus for the Republicans is, yeah, that's important, but it can all evaporate with a few of these major givers, and both parties have major givers. I
Right.
also think that it'd be interesting to see whether any of our respective friends in these committees that have been formed to raise money actually will back away. I suspect that they will compete favorably with the national parties who, still have like big boards of directors, lots of staff. They're just kind of cumbersome in my view as a means of getting money to candidates. But it is being viewed as something that's going to shift the way in which money is given, and therefore something I know we're going to have to
To
watch
be
as we
honest,
get into
to be
November.
honest with you, I never, I think money's been so loose in the last decade or two. This probably won't make much impact. I mean, I haven't really looked at the decision very carefully, but those big donors are going to give, and they're going to give in ways that favor them. There's another story that I just looked at today in the Times about Trump's uh, net worth going up,
Right.
and his income in
Couple billion.
2025 was up 2.2 billion as opposed to 600 some million in 2024. A lot of it is in crypto, but there was wasn't there a new contract this week I don't, that doesn't, that's only his disclosure. Doesn't include Don Jr. and Eric because there's a contract in Kazakhstan given out this week, I think, that's going to net them, you know, millions or
Right.
hundreds of millions of dollars. It just never stops. Craig, you've done a lot of the posting while I've been in the air and now at sea. But you might want to talk a little bit about this new project we're starting because you know it, last week I believe on our hot takes for the SPY, you talked about the Larry Ellison uh, contributions, and I talked about efforts that the administration is putting in place that could really subvert the election. And I think we have generally concluded that those two things go together and they are really a threat to our free and fair elections and democracy. And so that we're going to try to put the spotlight on things that are happening around the country uh, that are going to affect the election. And you might want to just say a word about that because you've done most of the posting.
Well, I've been amazed, and so we reach, and we much appreciate
Yeah,
those
yeah,
who listen to us and read what we write about in the Fromm and Fuller site.
yeah,
And we just decided that, yeah, there may be issues that we disagree about, but one thing
yeah,
we really agree about, and that's the importance of our democracy.
right,
And we both look at the threats to it and kind of come to some of the same conclusions. And money is certainly one. The interference of people's right to vote, it goes right along with it. And
yeah,
so as you've been traveling, I use some of our tools and techniques
yeah,
to start just monitoring keywords, looking for things that come up about election challenges, lawsuits, and oh my goodness, it's happening all over the country. And so if you go to the site and you look at election focus, which is now a whole
right,
section on our site that you can identify, you'll see what's going on in the states. And to me, the action is really in the states. These state election officials, secretaries of state in the states, state attorney generals, they are working night and day on both sides of the aisle to
right.
defend and protect their ability to conduct these elections fairly. And that's very encouraging. And of course, President Trump and his allies have had some setbacks as well. The money factor here is enormous, and I really I I I don't disagree with people having the right to make contributions. I do think there should be complete transparency. I think one of the
Right.
problems with Larry Ellison's contribution was we didn't know about it until the Wall Street Journal broke the story. a few days ago, $45 million, which I, jokingly said, if you were a millionaire, you had a
Yeah.
$1 million, net worth, and you were to give an equivalent amount of money to his 45 million, since he's worth 230 billion, I think, the
Right.
equivalent amount of money would basically be the cost of a 1 year subscription to Paramount Plus. So you have these people who have a capacity to give, and the giving has literally no impact on the way in which they're leading their lives, except it gives them favored treatment. And that's the sort of thing that these laws about conflict of interest have all been designed to protect in Republican administrations and Democratic administrations. So anyway, in our way of doing things, people always ask us, "Well, what can
Yeah.
we do? What can we do? What can we do?" And for us, it's to shed light on some of this based on
Yes.
experience. So I'm glad we're doing it together, and we're going to be looking even more closely as we get into the fall election.
It's so important because the thing you mentioned about just non-disclosure, sort of secret contributions. The people have figured out, in our days, it used to be hard and soft money, but even soft money, you generally had a sense of where it was coming from. But now people have figured out all these innovative ways to get around the tax code and around the campaign finance laws and just dump just hundreds of millions of dollars into campaigns. And I'm probably pretty naive about this stuff, but I've always thought that message matters more than anything. But boy, when you put that kind of money into a campaign, you can sure blur messages pretty effectively. So
You
it
know,
really is a threat
think
to our
about this.
democracy.
And when I was in office, and when you were there, but
Yeah,
what I know
right,
when I was in office, if Larry Ellison had come to town and bought me a steak dinner, that'd be a
right,
violation.
right,
And yet he funnels $45 million into the Trump campaign.
right.
Things have changed, and not all for the good, I guess.
And gotten plenty of benefits for that
Right, right.
25
And by the way, I'm
benefit.
not suggesting he's doing anything illegal.
Yeah.
This is
No.
just the way in which these laws have changed over time. So
So, but in any event, we're going to try to keep the spotlight on what's going on as we lead up to the election. The court has the thing that is about the Supreme Court. I mean, it seems that in the end, Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Barrett want to keep our democracy on course, and on the some really key decisions they come out. I think in on the right side, and on the side of protecting democratic institutions. We may not agree with them on everything, but that's been an encouraging thing for me this year.
it has. Well, listen, lots to talk about, and
Right?
we'll get together, I hope, on Thursday,
You're right.
wherever you
This
are
is
on the planet.
tomorrow. Tomorrow, I
Just
think we're going to
tomorrow,
be.
that's true.
I think we're going to be in Copenhagen tomorrow, but
All
I'm
right.
not
All
sure.
right. Well,
All
enjoy it
right.
out there. We'll talk
Take
soon.
care.
Take care. Bye.
See you. Bye bye.